In the early autumn of the year 2021, a pair of sisters hailing from Portland, Oregon, set out on what was intended to be a straightforward weekend expedition into the Gifford Pinchot National Forest for a camping adventure. 27-year-old Nina Harlo and her 29-year-old sibling, Rebecca Harlo, were seasoned hikers, having spent their formative years exploring the numerous pathways that crisscrossed the Pacific Northwest. They had informed their mother that their chosen campsite would be in the vicinity of the Lewis River Trail, a path frequented by many, renowned for its cascading waterfalls and its dense, verdant evergreen canopy. The sisters had scheduled their return for Sunday evening, the 12th of September. However, when Monday morning dawned and neither had appeared for their professional duties, their mother promptly contacted the Skamania County Sheriff's Office to file a report of their disappearance. What ensued became one of the most unsettling occurrences ever recorded within the vast expanse of the Gifford Pinchot National Forest. This particular case commenced with a conventional search effort, culminating in a discovery so extraordinary that authorities found themselves grappling to comprehend how two individuals could remain lost for a duration of 3 months, only to be found alive, albeit unconscious, and fastened to a tree amidst the wilderness. The morning of September 10th, 2021, dawned with a cool, overcast sky, a typical atmospheric condition for the early fall season in southwestern Washington. According to the individual overseeing the parking area at the trailhead for the Lewis River Trail, a silver Honda CR-V arrived and entered the lot at approximately 8:30 in the morning. 2 women emerged from the vehicle, both clad in hiking boots, equipped with day-pack backpacks, and sporting rain jackets. The attendant subsequently corroborated, during his formal deposition, that the sisters appeared at ease and thoroughly prepared for their excursion. They duly signed the visitor register at the information kiosk, indicating their planned itinerary as a 2-day circuit that would lead them along the lower segment of the Lewis River Trail, subsequently connecting to a network of smaller pathways that would ultimately guide them to several remote camping locations. Their signatures were legible, and their penmanship demonstrated a steady hand, displaying no discernible signs of apprehension or uncertainty. Following their stated plan, they departed, leaving their mother behind. Nina and Rebecca intended to establish their camp near Bolts Creek, a tranquil locale situated several miles into the forest where the trail narrows significantly, and the density of the tree cover becomes particularly pronounced. This particular area experiences minimal foot traffic even during the busiest periods, which made it an appealing destination for experienced campers seeking a sense of solitude. Their mother, Patricia Harlo, later affirmed in her official account that both of her daughters were characterized by their cautious and responsible natures. They habitually carried supplementary provisions, a comprehensive first aid kit, and a satellite communication device for emergent situations. This particular detail would later prove to be of considerable significance, as the device in question was never activated. On the evening of September 10th, Patricia received a concise text message from Rebecca, informing her of their safe arrival at the campsite and noting that the weather conditions remained favorable. The message was transmitted at 6:47 in the evening. According to records retrieved from the cellular towers provided by the mobile service provider, this was the final communication that any party received from either of the sisters. By Sunday evening, Patricia was anticipating the return of her daughters to their home. When she had not heard from them by 9 o'clock at night, she dispatched multiple text messages. None of these messages were successfully delivered. She attempted to telephone both of their mobile devices repeatedly, but each attempt resulted in the call being directed immediately to voicemail. While this was an unusual occurrence, it did not immediately provoke alarm. Cellular service within the Gifford Pinchot area is at best unreliable, and it was not an uncommon occurrence for hikers to experience prolonged periods without signal. However, when Monday morning arrived, and neither Nina nor Rebecca had presented themselves for their respective work duties, Patricia's concern escalated into outright fear. Nina was employed as a graphic designer at a marketing firm in Portland, while Rebecca served as a kindergarten teacher at a local elementary school. Both were recognized for their unwavering punctuality and their professional diligence. Their employers confirmed that neither woman had requested any time off beyond the weekend, and that both had significant engagements scheduled for Monday. By 10 o'clock in the morning, Patricia proceeded directly to the Skamania County Sheriff's Office to formally lodge a missing persons report. The responsibility for this case was assigned to Deputy Lawrence Finch, a seasoned law enforcement officer with over 15 years of experience in search and rescue operations. Finch meticulously reviewed the information furnished by Patricia, including the sisters' intended route, their last known location, and the chronological sequence of their communications. He immediately recognized the lack of activity on the satellite device as a point of considerable concern. Had the sisters encountered a perilous situation, the device was specifically engineered to transmit an automatic distress signal. The absence of such a signal suggested either that they had not perceived themselves to be in imminent danger, or that some external factor had prevented them from utilizing the device. The search operations commenced the following morning, September 14th, at the first light of dawn. A contingent comprising forest rangers, volunteers from search and rescue teams, and a K-9 unit convened at the Lewis River trailhead. The entire operation was under the coordination of the Skamania County Sheriff's Office in collaboration with the United States Forest Service. According to the official logbook of the operation, the initial objective was to meticulously retrace the sisters' planned route and to pinpoint their presumed campsite in the vicinity of Bolt Creek. The weather on the day of the search was clear, which facilitated the aerial surveillance capabilities of the helicopter team, allowing them to conduct comprehensive surveys of the surrounding topography. Nevertheless, the dense forest canopy significantly hampered the ability to observe the ground in the majority of areas. The forest in this particular region is predominantly composed of Douglas fir, western hemlock, and red cedar, with an undergrowth layer consisting of ferns, salal, and vine maple. Visibility from the air was thus restricted to open clearings, the banks of the river, and exposed rocky outcrops. The ground teams advanced methodically along the trail, diligently scrutinizing for any indications of recent human presence. Footprints, discarded wrappers, broken branches, any evidence that might suggest the sisters had traversed that path. By midday, the team reached the area in the proximity of Bolt Creek, where it was believed the Harlo sisters had established their camp. They discovered a clearing that bore signs of recent utilization. A fire pit containing charred wood, flattened areas of ground where a tent might have been erected, and several subtle indentations in the soil that could plausibly have been left by hiking boots. However, there was no tent, no backpacks, and no other camping paraphernalia present. The forensic team, which subsequently examined the site, noted in their report that the fire ring appeared to have been used within the preceding few days, but the wood was cold and damp, suggesting that no fire had been kindled recently. The search was progressively expanded outward from the campsite, employing a systematic grid pattern. Volunteers scoured the dense undergrowth, calling out the sisters' names and listening intently for any response. The K-9 units successfully picked up a scent trail leading away from the clearing, but this trail unfortunately dissipated after a few hundred yards, near a steep, rocky slope where the terrain presented significant navigational challenges. Over the subsequent several days, the scope of the search was broadened to encompass adjacent trails, the beds of creeks, and disused logging roads. Divers were enlisted to explore sections of the Lewis River, where the current was sufficiently moderate to permit underwater inspection. Yet, nothing was found. No items of clothing, no equipment, no discernible traces of the sisters' presence. By the conclusion of the first week, more than 200 volunteers had actively participated in the search efforts. Local news outlets provided extensive coverage of the unfolding story, and the Harlo family issued public pleas for any pertinent information. Photographs of Nina and Rebecca were distributed to neighboring towns, campgrounds, and ranger stations. The sisters were consistently described as friendly, experienced hikers who would not have knowingly exposed themselves to unnecessary risks. The complete absence of any tangible leads proved to be a source of significant frustration for all individuals involved. On September 21st, 11 days subsequent to the sisters' last confirmed sighting, the active search operations were officially scaled back. The Skamania County Sheriff's Office released a statement explaining that while the case remained officially open, the deployment of large-scale search teams was no longer feasible without the emergence of new information. The family was understandably devastated, yet they comprehended the inherent limitations of the available resources. Deputy Finch assured them that the investigation would persist and that any new evidence discovered would be pursued with utmost urgency. Weeks gradually transitioned into months. The case file remained on Deputy Finch's desk, yet there were no new developments to report. The Honda CR-V continued to be parked at the trailhead, entirely undisturbed. Investigators had thoroughly examined the vehicle, finding nothing out of the ordinary. Personal effects, spare clothing, a cooler containing melted ice, and a road map with the route to the trailhead highlighted in yellow were all present. Every aspect suggested a typical pre-planned trip. As October yielded its vibrant foliage to November, the forest underwent a transformation. The leaves shifted from golden hues to deep reds before eventually falling. Temperatures began to descend, and the initial light snowfall dusted the higher elevations. The Harlo family persevered with their own search initiatives, organizing weekend excursions involving friends and volunteers. They diligently posted flyers, maintained a dedicated social media page aimed at locating Nina and Rebecca, and actively contacted every outdoor enthusiast group and hiking club within the region. However, the forest remained silent, offering no clues. It was as if the sisters had simply dissolved into the trees, leaving behind only an abundance of unanswered questions and a pervasive sense of foreboding. 3 months elapsed in a profound silence. Winter descended upon the Gifford Pinchot National Forest, blanketing it with a thick layer of snow that rendered most trails impassable. The search for Nina and Rebecca Harlo had gone completely cold, not merely in terms of investigative leads, but quite literally. The ambient temperatures in December 2021 consistently plummeted below freezing, transforming the forest into a domain that only the most experienced winter hikers dared to venture into. The Skamania County Sheriff's Office maintained the case file as active. However, in the absence of any new information or credible sightings, there was little that could be accomplished until the spring thaw. Deputy Lawrence Finch periodically reviewed the file, harboring the hope that something novel might surface. But each review concluded identically, leaving him with more questions than answers. The Harlo family steadfastly refused to relinquish their hope. Patricia Harlo dedicated her days to coordinating efforts with missing persons organizations, consulting with private investigators, and reaching out to psychics and volunteers who claimed they possessed the ability to assist. She posted updates on social media platforms weekly, ensuring that the narrative of the sisters' disappearance remained in the public consciousness. Rebecca's students at the elementary school created drawings and heartfelt cards, which were prominently displayed in the school's front office, each one representing a silent plea for her safe return. Nina's colleagues organized a candlelight vigil in downtown Portland, attracting the attention of local media outlets and sustaining pressure on authorities to continue their search endeavors. Yet, as December gave way to January, even the most optimistic supporters began to brace themselves for the worst. The likelihood of surviving for 3 months in the wilderness, particularly during the harsh winter season, was exceedingly remote. Hypothermia, starvation, exposure to the elements, encounters with wild animals. The catalog of potential dangers was extensive and unforgiving. Some volunteers gradually ceased their attendance at search coordination meetings. Certain family friends began to speak in the past tense when referring to the sisters. The unspoken collective sentiment was that Nina and Rebecca were gone, and that when spring finally arrived, the forest would reveal their remains. But the forest, it seemed, had alternative intentions. On the morning of December 14th, 2021, a wildlife biologist named Gordon Pace was conducting a routine survey of elk migration patterns within a secluded section of the Gifford Pinchot National Forest. His professional duties necessitated his venturing off established trails into areas seldom visited by the general public. He was equipped with GPS tracking devices, a camera fitted with a telephoto lens, and provisions for several days. According to his official report, he was traversing a dense expanse of old-growth forest, approximately 4 miles northeast of the Lewis River Trail, when he observed something highly unusual. Initially, he mistook the sight for a pair of mannequins. 2 figures stood upright against the colossal trunk of a Douglas fir tree, their bodies completely motionless, their heads slumped forward. The scene was so peculiar and incongruous with its surroundings that Pace initially concluded it was either an artistic installation or a practical joke left behind by other hikers. However, as he drew nearer, the details became progressively clearer and more profoundly unsettling. The figures were not mannequins. They were human beings. 2 women, both attired in heavily soiled and tattered clothing, were bound to the tree with thick nylon rope. Their arms were secured behind them, wrapped around the trunk, and fastened with considerable tightness. Their legs were similarly bound at the ankles and knees, effectively preventing any movement. Both women appeared to be unconscious, their heads hanging downwards, their hair matted and filthy. Their faces were streaked with dirt, their skin pale and chapped from exposure to the elements. Their garments, which had once served as practical hiking attire, were now reduced to little more than rags. Pace halted abruptly, his heart pounding uncontrovertibly. For a moment, he was incapable of processing the surreal reality unfolding before him. Then, his professional training took precedence. He retrieved his satellite phone and immediately initiated contact with emergency services. His voice, as documented in the transcript of the call, was demonstrably shaky but articulated with clarity. He provided his precise GPS coordinates, described his discovery, and emphatically stressed that the 2 women appeared to be alive but unresponsive. The dispatcher instructed him to approach cautiously and assess for vital signs, but cautioned him against attempting to untie them until assistance arrived. Pace moved closer, his hands trembling as he reached out to palpate the neck of the woman nearest to him. He detected a pulse. It was faint and irregular, but it was undeniably present. He then checked the second woman and found the same. Both were alive, barely, but alive. He stepped back, overcome by the sheer implausibility of the situation he was witnessing. These women had been reported missing for 3 months. It was the heart of winter. The temperature that morning was just above freezing, and the nighttime temperatures regularly dropped significantly below. There was no discernible shelter, no source of fire, no apparent provision for sustenance or hydration. And yet, astonishingly, they were still breathing. The emergency response was swift and decisive. A helicopter was dispatched from the nearest ranger station, and a ground team was mobilized to reach Pace's location. The terrain was challenging, covered in snow and dense underbrush, but the coordinates provided by Pace enabled the teams to navigate directly to the site. Within 90 minutes, the initial responders arrived. The scene that greeted them was one that none of them would ever forget. The 2 women remained tied to the tree, their bodies limp and unresponsive. Their clothing was in tatters, exposing skin that was marred with bruises, abrasions, and what appeared to be insect bites. Their hair was disheveled and matted with dirt, leaves, and what resembled dried mud. Their extremities were swollen and discolored, likely a consequence of impaired circulation caused by the tight bindings. One of the paramedics on the scene, a woman named Jennifer Whitmore, later recounted the scene in her official statement. She described the sisters as appearing as though they had endured a brutal conflict. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes hollowed, their lips cracked and bleeding. However, what most profoundly struck her was the peculiar posture of their bodies. Despite being unconscious, both women were still standing upright, their support derived solely from the ropes. It was as if they had been meticulously positioned to maintain that upright stance even as they succumbed to unconsciousness. The paramedics commenced their work with urgency. They assessed vital signs, administered intravenous fluids, and carefully severed the ropes that bound the women to the tree. As the bindings were removed, both women subsequently collapsed into the arms of the responding personnel. They were immediately placed onto stretchers and prepared for aerial evacuation. The helicopter transported them to Legacy Salmon Creek Medical Center in Vancouver, Washington, where a specialized trauma team was on standby. The initial medical evaluation yielded startling results. Both Nina and Rebecca were suffering from severe dehydration, profound malnutrition, and debilitating hypothermia. Their core body temperatures had dropped to dangerously low levels, hovering just above the critical threshold for life-threatening complications. They had experienced substantial weight loss, with estimates suggesting each had lost between 30 and 40 pounds. Their muscle mass had significantly deteriorated, and their skin displayed clear indications of prolonged exposure to the harsh environmental conditions. However, the most alarming finding was the definitive evidence of restraint injuries. Deep ligature marks encircled their wrists, ankles, and torsos, unequivocally indicating that they had been bound for an extended duration. The marks were consistent with the use of nylon rope, the very same type of material that had been employed to secure them to the tree. The medical team also documented the presence of pressure sores and skin breakdown in the areas where the ropes had been most tightly applied, suggesting that the bindings had neither been removed nor adjusted for a period of days, and possibly even weeks. Notwithstanding their dire condition, both women remained alive. Their bodies had, by some extraordinary means, withstood 3 months of exposure, starvation, and physical restraint. The attending physicians were at a loss to provide a scientific explanation. One physician remarked during a case conference that the human body possesses an astonishing capacity for resilience. However, what these women had managed to survive appeared to defy conventional medical understanding. Logically, they should not have been alive, yet miraculously, they were. News of this extraordinary discovery spread with remarkable alacrity. Within a matter of hours, both local and national media outlets were broadcasting the sensational report that the missing Harlo sisters had been located alive in the Gifford Pinchot National Forest. The narrative rapidly dominated headlines, not solely due to their survival, but also because of the profoundly bizarre and unsettling circumstances surrounding their discovery. Questions immediately began to proliferate. Who had bound them to the tree? Why had they been abandoned in such a remote and inaccessible location? How had they managed to survive for 3 months without access to food, water, or shelter? And, perhaps most disturbingly, why remained they unconscious when they were found? The Skamania County Sheriff's Office immediately launched a comprehensive investigation. Deputy Finch, who had initially spearheaded the missing persons investigation, was tasked with overseeing the criminal inquiry. The case was no longer simply about locating 2 missing hikers. It had escalated into a potential scenario involving abduction, assault, and attempted homicide. The precise location where the sisters were discovered was meticulously secured and treated as a crime scene. Forensic teams were dispatched to meticulously document every minute detail. Photographers captured images of the tree, the ropes, the surrounding terrain, and any potential evidence that might have been left behind. The ropes themselves were collected and submitted to the State Crime Laboratory for detailed analysis. Soil samples were carefully collected from the base of the tree. Footprints discernible in the snow were precisely measured and photographed. Every piece of physical evidence was systematically catalogued and preserved for future examination. One of the most significant discoveries was a series of boot prints leading away from the tree. The impressions were distinctive, featuring a heavy tread pattern that suggested the footwear was either work boots or sturdy hiking boots. These prints led in a northeasterly direction, deeper into the forest, before ultimately disappearing into a rocky area where the ground was too hard to retain any impressions. The forensic team pursued this trail as far as was feasible, but it ultimately went cold. It was evident that whoever had left those prints possessed a considerable degree of skill in navigating the forest without leaving a discernible trace. The investigation into the events that transpired during Nina and Rebecca Harlo's 3 months in the wilderness commenced in earnest as soon as the crime scene was secured. Deputy Lawrence Finch liaised closely with the forensic teams, medical personnel, and Forest Service officials to meticulously reconstruct a plausible timeline of events. However, the most crucial source of information, the sisters themselves, remained unavailable for questioning. Both women were still unconscious, their bodies engaged in a desperate struggle to recover from the extreme trauma they had endured. The medical professionals at Legacy Salmon Creek Medical Center worked around the clock to stabilize their fragile conditions. However, the process of reviving an individual from the brink of death is inherently delicate and cannot be subjected to undue haste. According to the medical reports compiled in the days following their admission, Nina and Rebecca were suffering from a complex combination of severe dehydration, profound malnutrition, critical hypothermia, and what the attending physician described as an overwhelming state of profound physical and psychological shock. Their vital signs were weak but stable. Intravenous fluids were administered continuously to rehydrate their bodies, and warming blankets were employed to gradually elevate their core temperatures. Blood tests revealed alarmingly low levels of electrolytes, essential vitamins, and vital proteins, consistent with prolonged periods of starvation. Their physical forms had started to break down, consuming their own musculature in a desperate bid for survival. The injuries sustained from being bound were meticulously examined. The abrasive marks on their wrists and ankles were profound and discolored, with certain sections exhibiting signs of infection. The medical personnel addressed these wounds with antibiotics and specialized dressings. However, the severity of the damage indicated that the restraints had been in place for weeks, potentially throughout the entire duration of their confinement. Pressure abrasions on their backs and flanks suggested they had been kept in a standing or semi-upright posture for prolonged periods, denying them the ability to sit or recline. One of the trauma nurses, a gentleman by the name of Paul Becker, later testified that he had never witnessed anything comparable. The human physique is not engineered to remain upright and confined for such an extensive duration. He remarked, the mere fact that they endured it at all is nothing short of miraculous. On the 3rd day following their liberation, specifically December 17th, Rebecca Harlo began to display indications of regaining awareness. Her eyelids flickered, and she made subtle movements with her digits. The medical staff promptly alerted Deputy Finch, who had been stationed at the hospital, anticipating any opportunity to converse with the sisters. Nevertheless, the physicians cautioned him that Rebecca was not yet in a suitable state for an interview. Her cognitive functions remained impaired, and any premature attempt at questioning could inflict further harm. Finch acquiesced to the delay, but remained present at the hospital, prepared to proceed the moment the doctors granted clearance. 2 days afterward, on December 19th, Rebecca fully regained consciousness. She opened her eyes, surveyed the room, and commenced weeping. The nurses offered her solace, assuring her of her safety, and that her sister was in the adjacent room. Rebecca's initial utterance, as documented in the nursing records, was a hushed query. Where is he? The question sent a palpable shiver through everyone present. The nurses requested clarification, but Rebecca grew distressed, her heart rate accelerating on the monitor. The medical team administered a mild sedative to pacify her, and she lapsed back into a light slumber. However, those 3 words had already irrevocably altered the trajectory of the investigation. There was indeed a he. Someone was responsible for their plight, and this individual remained at large. Na regained consciousness the subsequent day. Her awakening was less ostentatious than her sister's, but no less emotionally charged. She opened her eyes, gazed at the ceiling for several minutes, and then turned her head to behold the nurses standing by her side. Initially, she remained silent, but tears streamed down her face. When the nurses inquired about her well-being, she nodded weakly and whispered that she was experiencing thirst. They provided her with small sips of water and reassured her that she was in a hospital and secure. Similar to our sister, Na's primary concern was Rebecca. Upon being informed that Rebecca was alive and recuperating in the adjacent room, Na closed her eyes and wept softly. On December 21st, 10 days after their discovery, both sisters were deemed sufficiently stable for interviews with law enforcement. Deputy Finch, accompanied by a female detective named Lara Grimshaw, entered Rebecca's room first. The interview was conducted with the presence of a counselor, as both women were considered vulnerable witnesses. The session was video recorded, and a transcript was subsequently incorporated into the case file. Rebecca was seated upright in bed, her arms swathed in bandages, her countenance still pallid and gaunt. She regarded the detectives with a palpable mixture of apprehension and exhaustion. Finch commenced gently, requesting her to recount her recollections of the day she and her sister vanished. Rebecca spoke slowly, her voice barely audible above a whisper. She explained that on the evening of September 10th, she and Na had established their campsite near Bolt Creek, precisely as they had arranged. They prepared supper, utilizing a small portable stove, discussed their week's events, and observed the sunset through the arboreal canopy. Everything appeared normal. They retired for the night around 10 o'clock, zipped within their tent with no premonition of impending danger. Rebecca paused, her hands trembling. She stated that at some point during the night, she was awakened by the sound of the tent zipper being drawn open. Initially, she surmised it was Nina arising to attend to a personal need. However, she then realized that Nina was still beside her, also stirring. Before either could react, an intense beam of light flooded the tent, momentarily blinding them. A male voice, calm and measured, instructed them not to cry out. Rebecca indicated that she could not discern his features due to the illumination, but could perceive his silhouette. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and held an object in his other hand that appeared to be a knife. The individual commanded them to exit the tent slowly. Rebecca and Nina complied, too petrified to offer any resistance. Once outside, the man utilized zip ties to secure their hands behind their backs. He proceeded with swift efficiency, as if he had performed such an action on numerous prior occasions. He remained silent, save for issuing instructions. Do not run. Do not scream. Do not look at me. He then compelled them to walk. Rebecca could not specify the exact distance they traversed due to the darkness and her disorientation, but she estimated it to be at least an hour, possibly longer. They navigated through the woodland, stumbling over roots and stones, with the man following closely behind. At one juncture, Nina attempted to question him about his intentions, but he silenced her. His demeanor, according to Rebecca, was not one of anger. Rather, it was something more unsettling, an unnerving absence of emotion, as if he were entirely indifferent to their plight. Eventually, they reached a clearing where the man had established a rudimentary camp. A tarp was stretched between 2 trees, accompanied by a collection of provisions and a large backpack. He directed them to sit on the ground while he prepared additional restraints. This time, he employed nylon rope identical to the material later discovered binding them to the tree. He secured their ankles, their knees, and then looped the rope around their torsos, tethering them to adjacent trees, rendering them immobile. Rebecca's voice faltered as she recounted the subsequent events. The man did not inflict physical harm upon them, at least not in the manner she had anticipated. He did not sexually assault them. He did not strike them. Instead, he confined them there, bound day after day. He provided them with minimal amounts of water, just enough to sustain their lives. Occasionally, he offered them dried fruit or crackers, but never in quantities sufficient to alleviate their hunger. He spoke to them sparingly. When he did, it was solely to instruct them to remain quiet or cease struggling. Rebecca stated that she and Nina attempted to reason with him, to inquire about the purpose of his actions, but he offered no response. He simply observed them with a vacant expression, as if they were inanimate objects rather than sentient beings. Days bled into weeks. Rebecca lost all track of time. The man relocated them on 2 separate occasions, each time to a new location deeper within the forest. He meticulously concealed his tracks, selecting sites where they were unlikely to be discovered. He regularly inspected the ropes, tightening them whenever they slackened. He never permitted them to sit or recline for extended periods. For the majority of the time, they were forced to remain standing, leaning against the trees for support. The pain was excruciating, Rebecca conveyed. Their muscles seized, their joints ached, their skin chafed and bled where the ropes dug into their flesh. They pleaded with him for respite, but he refused. He appeared intent on making them suffer, but in a controlled, deliberate fashion. He never allowed them to perish, yet he never afforded them any comfort. As the weeks elapsed, Rebecca recounted that she and Nina began to lose hope. They ceased conversing with each other, as it exacted too much energy. They abandoned their struggles, recognizing their futility. They simply existed, awaiting a change in their circumstances. And then, one day, the man transported them to their final destination, the tree where they would ultimately be discovered. He secured them more rigorously than ever before, wrapping the ropes around the trunk so tightly that they could barely draw breath, and then he departed. Rebecca had no recollection of the duration of his absence hours, perhaps days. Time had lost all significance. She remembered feeling her strength wane, her vision blur, her thoughts become muddled. She recalled Nina whispering that she loved her, and then everything faded to black. The next sensation was waking up in the hospital. Deputy Finch listened to Rebecca's narrative in silence, his expression somber. When she concluded, he asked if she could provide a description of the man. Rebecca closed her eyes, attempting to recall specifics. She stated he was Caucasian, likely in his 40s or 50s. He possessed a thick beard, dark with streaks of gray. He wore a heavy jacket, cargo pants, and work boots. His voice was deep and resonant, devoid of any discernible accent. However, the most striking characteristic, she noted, was his eyes. They were cold, vacant, as if he were not truly present. Na's account, recorded the following day in a separate interview, corroborated her sister's testimony in virtually every particular. She described the identical sequence of events, the same terrifying night they were abducted from their tent, and the same methodical cruelty of their captor. Yet Nina provided details that Rebecca either had not observed or had been too traumatized to retain. According to Nina, the man who abducted them appeared intimately familiar with the forest. He navigated the darkness without hesitation, never consulting a map or GPS, never faltering or losing his way. He was aware of his location at all times, suggesting he had spent considerable time in the vicinity, possibly for years. Nina also observed that the man carried very little with him. There was no substantial camping equipment, nor any vehicle she ever saw or heard. Everything he possessed fit within a single large backpack and a smaller waist pack. He was entirely self-sufficient, living off the land in a manner indicative of either military training or extensive wilderness expertise. During the initial days of their captivity, Nina recounted attempting to memorize landmarks, hoping that should they ever escape, she could guide rescuers back to their place of confinement. However, the man seemed cognizant of this effort. Every few days, he would relocate them to a new position, always deeper into the forest, always farther from any established trail or road. Each time, he meticulously erased their tracks, brushing away footprints, breaking branches to obscure the path, and selecting routes that traversed rock or firm ground where tracks would not be visible. Na recalled a specific moment that stood out to her. It occurred during the second week, she believed, though she could not be certain. The man had just finished tightening the ropes around her wrists, and the pain was so intense that she could not refrain from weeping. Through her tears, she asked him why he was perpetrating this. What did he desire from them? The man paused, gazed at her with those empty eyes, and uttered a statement that chilled her to the core. He said, "I just wanted to see how long you would last." Na informed the detectives that in that instant, she comprehended that this was not motivated by ransom, revenge, or any rational objective. It was an experiment for him. They were test subjects. He was observing their suffering, as a scientist might monitor rodents in a cage. And that realization was more terrifying than anything else, because it implied there was no reasoning with him, no appealing to his humanity. He did not perceive them as human beings. As the interviews continued over the subsequent days, both sisters furnished additional fragments of information. They described the man's routine. He would check on them twice daily, typically in the early morning and late evening. He would provide them with water from a canteen, sometimes just a few sips, other times half a cup. The sustenance he offered was minimal: dried fruit, crackers, and once a piece of jerky. Never enough to sustain them, but just enough to keep them alive. He never kindled a fire, never cooked food, never engaged in any activity that might attract attention. He was a phantom moving through the forest, leaving no discernible trace. Rebecca mentioned that on several occasions she overheard distant voices, presumably hikers or search parties, calling out names. On one occasion, she was certain she heard a helicopter overhead. Each time, she and Nina attempted to cry out, but the man had gagged them with strips of cloth whenever he sensed anyone in proximity. He would stand perfectly still, observing the forest, waiting until the sounds dissipated. Then he would remove the gags and proceed as if nothing had occurred. Na also recounted the psychological torment. The man seldom spoke, but when he did, it was invariably to emphasize their helplessness. He informed them that no one was searching for them any longer. He asserted that their family had relinquished their efforts, that the search had been suspended, that they had been forgotten. Na stated that she attempted to dismiss his words, but as the days stretched into weeks and then months, doubt began to surface. Perhaps he was correct. Perhaps no one was coming. The physical deterioration was gradual yet relentless. Both sisters described how their bodies began to succumb. Their muscles weakened. Their skin became afflicted with sores. Their hair detached in clumps. They ceased menstruating. Their teeth loosened. They could sense themselves gradually fading away. However, the process was so protracted that there was no singular moment they could identify as the end. It was merely a prolonged, agonizing dissolution. And then, in what they believed to be their final days, the man altered his pattern. Instead of moving them again, he transported them to the large Douglas fir tree and bound them in a manner distinct from before. The ropes were tighter, more permanent. He wrapped them around the trunk multiple times, securing their arms, legs, and torso so completely that they were rendered entirely immobile. He stepped back, regarded them for a considerable duration, and then departed. That was the last encounter they had with him. Na recalled thinking that this was the end, that he had resolved to let them perish. She remembered her vision darkening, her thoughts scattering, and then oblivion. The subsequent sensation was awakening in a hospital bed. The testimonies provided by Nina and Rebecca offered investigators a clear understanding of the events that transpired. However, they also introduced pressing inquiries. Who was this man? Where was he currently? And why had he abandoned the sisters at the culmination instead of completing his undertaking? Deputy Finch convened a task force comprising detectives from the Skamania County Sheriff's Office, agents from the FBI's Violent Crimes Unit, and forensic specialists from the Washington State Patrol. The case was subsequently classified as aggravated kidnapping, assault, and attempted murder. The fact that the suspect had held 2 women captive for 3 months within a national forest elevated it to a federal case, thereby incorporating additional resources and expertise into the investigation. The primary objective was to identify the suspect. The physical description furnished by the sisters was sufficiently detailed to generate a composite sketch. A forensic artist collaborated separately with both Nina and Rebecca, and the resulting depictions exhibited remarkable consistency. A man was estimated to be between 45 and 55 years of age, Caucasian with a stout build, a thick dark beard streaked with gray, and deeply set eyes. He stood approximately 6 feet tall and possessed a weathered, sun-damaged complexion consistent with prolonged outdoor exposure. The composite sketch was disseminated to law enforcement agencies throughout the Pacific Northwest, posted on social media, and featured on local and national news broadcasts. Inquiries began to materialize almost immediately, but the majority were either vague or pertained to individuals who possessed alibis or did not closely align with the description. A promising lead emerged from a retired forest ranger named Donald Keir, who contacted the tip line after observing the sketch on the evening news. Keir indicated that the man depicted in the drawing appeared familiar. He believed it might be someone he had encountered on multiple occasions over the years in the Gifford Pinchot area. This individual lived off the grid and actively avoided interaction with others. Keir described this person as a survivalist, someone who moved through the forest with an air of ownership, never registering with the Park Service, and who seemed to resent the presence of other hikers. Keir could not recall the man's name, but remembered him driving an older pickup truck, dark green or gray, and that he had once mentioned residing somewhere in the remote backcountry near the Wind River drainage. This intelligence was relayed to the investigative team, and a comprehensive search of vehicle registration records within the region was initiated. Analysts cross-referenced the description with known individuals possessing prior interactions with law enforcement in the area, focusing on those with records of trespassing, poaching, or other infractions related to public lands. Within 2 days, a name surfaced. His name was Vincent Lell, a 52-year-old man with a sparse yet revealing criminal history. Lell had been cited numerous times for illegal camping, unauthorized entry into restricted zones, and hunting out of season. He had no permanent address on record, but his last known location was documented as a rural route near the town of Carson, Washington, approximately 20 miles south of the area where the sisters were discovered. His vehicle registration precisely matched the description provided by Keir, a 1998 Chevrolet Silverado, dark green, bearing Washington license plates. More significantly, Lell's physical appearance corresponded almost perfectly with the composite sketch. His driver's license photograph, taken 6 years prior, depicted a man with a substantial beard, deep-set eyes, and a hardened expression. He was listed as 6 feet 1 inch tall and weighing 210 pounds. The resemblance was sufficiently striking that Deputy Finch immediately prioritized Lell on the suspect list. A background check revealed additional concerning details. Lell had served in the United States Army in the early 1990s, specializing in field reconnaissance. He had received an honorable discharge, but his service record noted several disciplinary actions for insubordination and failure to adhere to protocol. Following his military service, he had held sporadic employment in construction and logging, but there was no record of consistent employment after 2015. He appeared to have entirely retreated from the grid, adopting a transient lifestyle within the forests of southern Washington. Investigators secured a warrant to search any property or vehicles associated with Vincent Lell. The primary challenge lay in locating him. He possessed no phone, no email, no social media presence, and no utility accounts. He was a man who existed almost entirely outside the modern sphere. The search efforts were concentrated in the vicinity of Carson, where Lell's truck had last been registered. Deputies canvassed the rural roads, showing his photograph to residents and inquiring about any recent sightings. Several individuals recognized him. One woman reported that he used to park his truck at a dirt turnout near the Wind River and embark on hiking expeditions into the woods for weeks at a time. A gas station attendant recalled selling him fuel and provisions a few months prior, but could not specify the exact date. On December 27, 2021, a significant breakthrough in the case emerged from an unexpected source. A postal worker named Amanda Briggs, who served the rural routes near Carson, contacted the tip line after seeing Vincent Lell's photograph on the news. She informed investigators that she had observed a man matching his description merely 3 days earlier. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, he had been walking along Forest Road 43, a remote gravel road that led deep into the backcountry. She remembered him distinctly because it was unusual to encounter anyone on foot in that area, particularly during winter. Briggs stated that the man was carrying a large backpack and was walking away from the main road, heading toward the forest. She had slowed her vehicle as she passed him, contemplating whether he might require assistance, but he had waved her away without making eye contact. She noted that he had a thick beard and was attired in heavy outdoor clothing. Upon seeing his photograph on the news, she was convinced it was the same individual. Deputy Finch immediately coordinated a comprehensive search mission, focusing on Forest Road 43 and the adjacent remote wilderness. A dedicated team comprised of law enforcement officers, United States Forest Service personnel, and Federal Bureau of Investigation agents convened at the designated trailhead in the early hours of December 28th. The landscape was characterized by its isolation, dense forestation, and a substantial snow cover. Temperatures plummeted well below freezing, and the thick overhead tree canopy severely restricted visibility. The team advanced with extreme caution, fully aware that if Lell were indeed present in the area, his intimate knowledge of the terrain would grant him a significant advantage. Specialized search dogs were deployed to detect any lingering scent, and an unmanned aerial vehicle, equipped with thermal imaging capabilities, was dispatched to scan the woodland for any heat signatures. The ground contingent followed a series of faint tracks imprinted in the snow, which veered away from the road and led into a densely wooded section of ancient timber. After approximately 3 hours of meticulous tracking, the team unearthed a hidden campsite concealed beneath a rocky overhang. The location was exceptionally well camouflaged, shielded by dense undergrowth, and strategically positioned to render it virtually invisible from more than a few yards. A small tarp was strung between 2 trees. A sleeping bag lay spread upon a bed of pine needles, and a ring of stones marked the site of a fire pit, though no embers remained. Personal effects were found strewn about the campsite, including a metal cooking pot, a water purification device, several sealed food containers, and a substantial hunting knife with a leather scabbard. Adjacent to the sleeping bag rested a backpack, matching the description provided by the postal worker. Upon examining the contents of the backpack, investigators discovered additional provisions, detailed maps of the Gifford Pinchot National Forest with specific areas highlighted in pencil, and most crucially, a compact digital camera. This camera was an older model, the type favored by hikers and outdoor enthusiasts before the widespread adoption of smartphones. When powered on by the investigators, the battery level was low, but still functional. The screen displayed a file directory of stored images. What was revealed on that camera would emerge as some of the most disturbing evidence uncovered throughout the entire investigation. The photographs depicted Nina and Rebecca Harlo at various junctures during their captivity. In certain images, they were bound to trees, their countenances gaunt and streaked with dirt. In others, they were seated on the ground, still restrained and visibly exhausted. The images, while not sexually explicit, were profoundly unsettling due to their implications. They served as documentation, meticulously maintained by an individual who perceived his victims as mere specimens. Each photograph was time-stamped, enabling investigators to construct a precise timeline of the sisters' ordeal based on the accompanying metadata. The earliest image was dated September 11, 2021, the day following the sisters' disappearance. The most recent photograph bore the date December 9th, a mere 2 days before their discovery. These images corroborated every detail provided by Nina and Rebecca. They also definitively confirmed that Vincent Lell had held them captive for the entire 3-month duration, systematically documenting their suffering with a detached, methodical approach. However, Lell himself was conspicuously absent from the campsite. The sleeping bag felt cold to the touch, and no fresh tracks indicated an exit from the immediate vicinity. It appeared he had been present recently, possibly within the preceding 48 hours, but had departed before the arrival of the search party. A perimeter was swiftly established around the site, and reinforcements were summoned to broaden the search area. Helicopters traversed the surrounding ridges, and tracking teams fanned out in every direction. The snow, while aiding in the visibility of movement, also complicated and slowed the search, introducing an element of increased danger. As the afternoon progressed, the temperature continued its descent. The search teams operated in rotating shifts to mitigate the risks of frostbite and exhaustion. By nightfall, no trace of Lell had been found. A decision was made to maintain a continuous presence in the area throughout the night, with teams positioned at strategic points to prevent his undetected passage. Portable lighting was deployed, and thermal imaging equipment remained operational around the clock. At approximately 3 o'clock in the morning on December 29th, one of the thermal cameras detected a heat signature moving slowly through the trees, situated roughly half a mile east of the campsite. The operator immediately relayed this information to the ground teams, and a unit of 6 officers cautiously approached the location. They advanced with deliberate care, utilizing night vision equipment and communicating via hand signals to avoid alerting their quarry. As they drew nearer, they observed a figure navigating the underbrush. The individual was tall, robustly built, and carrying a substantial pack. The officers identified themselves as law enforcement and ordered the individual to halt and reveal his hands. The figure paused momentarily, then dropped the pack and began to flee. The officers gave chase, their boots crunching audibly through the snow. The terrain proved treacherous, littered with fallen logs, rocks, and uneven ground. The suspect exhibited remarkable speed and agility, moving through the forest with the practiced ease of someone intimately familiar with the environment. However, the officers had the advantage of superior numbers and equipment. One of the deputies, a younger officer named Travis Morrow, managed to intercept the suspect's path by taking a circuitous route around a cluster of trees. When the suspect emerged into a small clearing, Morrow was positioned to confront him. He again commanded the individual to stop and get on the ground. The man hesitated, his breathing heavy, his face partially obscured by his hooded jacket. Then slowly, he raised his hands and dropped to his knees. Officers converged on him, their weapons drawn, ordering him to lie flat and place his hands behind his head. He complied without resistance. As the officers secured him with handcuffs, they pulled back his hood and illuminated his face with a flashlight. It was Vincent Lell. The resemblance to the composite sketch was unmistakable, down to the thick beard, deep-set eyes, and weathered skin. He gazed up at the officers with an expression devoid of fear or defiance, a blank, emotionless stare identical to the one Nina and Rebecca had described. Deputy Finch arrived on the scene 20 minutes later. He looked down at the man in handcuffs, experiencing a profound sense of relief mingled with anger. This was the individual responsible for tormenting 2 innocent women for 3 months, for abandoning them to the elements, for treating them as mere objects in some twisted personal experiment. Lyle was read his Miranda rights and transported under heavy escort to the Schimannia County Jail. He remained silent during the journey, made no request for legal counsel, and offered no protest regarding his arrest. He simply sat in the rear of the patrol car, gazing out the window at the dark forest as it receded. Back at the campsite, forensic teams continued their meticulous work. In addition to the camera, they discovered notebooks filled with handwritten entries. These were not personal diaries in the conventional sense, but rather observational records. Lyle had meticulously documented the sisters' physical condition, their reactions to deprivation, and their emotional states. He detailed how long they could endure without sustenance, how their bodies responded to cold, and how their will to resist gradually eroded. The entries read like a clinical, detached field report. One entry, dated November 18th, described how Rebecca had ceased speaking entirely and how Nina had become delirious, engaging in self-talk and experiencing hallucinations. Lyle had recorded these observations without any discernible trace of empathy or guilt, viewing them solely as data points. The notebooks were entered into evidence, alongside the camera, the maps, and all other materials recovered from the site. The case against Vincent Lyle was solidifying rapidly, and the evidence was undeniably compelling. However, a persistent question lingered in the minds of everyone involved in the investigation. Why had he left the sisters tied to that tree and simply walked away? Why, after 3 months of captivity, had he not completed his grim undertaking? The answer, if one existed, would have to come from Lyle himself. We are nearing the conclusion of this harrowing account. If you have followed this narrative to this point, you must witness its resolution. Please remain attentive until the very end and consider sharing this video to ensure this extraordinary story of resilience reaches a wider audience. Vincent Lyle's initial formal interrogation commenced on the afternoon of December 29th, 2021, within an interview room at the Schimannia County Jail. He had been in custody for less than 12 hours, yet the weight of the evidence against him was already substantial. The digital camera, the notebooks, the campsite, and the testimony of the sisters all pointed to a man who had committed one of the most disturbing crimes in the history of the Pacific Northwest. Deputy Lawrence Finch led the interrogation, accompanied by FBI Special Agent Karen Durst, an expert in abduction and psychological manipulation cases. The session was video recorded, and a transcript was prepared for use during the eventual trial. Lyle sat opposite them at the table, his hands cuffed in front of him, his expression as vacant as it had been at the time of his apprehension. He had been offered legal representation, but declined, stating he had no need for a lawyer as he had nothing to conceal. This assertion was particularly chilling, given the nature of the evidence already amassed. Finch began by requesting Lyle confirm his identity and provide details of his recent whereabouts. Lyle responded in a flat, monotone voice. He confirmed his name as Vincent Andrew Lyle, stated he was 52 years old, and had resided in the Gifford Pinchot National Forest for approximately 6 years, preferring the wilderness to populated areas due to the unpredictability and annoyance of people. The forest, he explained, possessed logic, rules, and order. When questioned about Nina and Rebecca Harlo, Lay did not deny knowing them. He acknowledged encountering them on the night of September 10th, 2021, and admitted to taking them from their campsite. He described the event with the same clinical detachment evident in his notebook entries. He stated he had been observing the campsite for several hours before approaching, waiting until he was certain they were asleep. He elaborated that he used a flashlight to disorient them and zip ties for restraint, citing their efficiency and minimal risk of injury. When Finch inquired about his motivation for abducting them, Lell paused for the first time. He tilted his head slightly, as if contemplating how to articulate something he considered self-evident. He then stated, "I wanted to see what would happen." Agent Durst pressed him further, asking for clarification on what he meant and what he aimed to learn. Lell's response was disturbing in its stark simplicity. He explained he had always harbored a curiosity about human endurance, specifically how long an individual could survive under extreme conditions without food, water, or comfort. He asserted that books and documentaries offered limited insight, and he desired to conduct his own empirical research. He viewed Nina and Rebecca not as individuals, but as subjects in an experiment. He had meticulously controlled every variable: the quantity of food and water they received, the temperature and exposure they endured, and the psychological toll of isolation and restraint. He documented everything, deeming documentation essential for understanding the outcomes. Finch directly asked Lell if he understood that his actions were wrong and had caused immense suffering to two innocent individuals. Lell met his gaze with those cold, vacant eyes and replied that he understood society would perceive it that way, but that he personally did not consider it wrong. He posited that suffering was an inherent aspect of existence, and that his experiment mirrored the natural processes imposed upon living creatures daily. He drew a parallel to a scientist studying wild animals, observing their behavior without undue interference. The detectives exchanged a glance. They had encountered numerous criminals throughout their careers, but Lell was different. He displayed no anger, no remorse, and made no attempt to justify his actions on moral grounds. He simply failed to recognize the humanity of his victims. To him, they were objects, and his actions constituted a form of research. Agent Durst shifted the line of questioning, inquiring why Lell had abandoned the sisters at the tree rather than continuing his experiment or eliminating them entirely. This question appeared to catch Lell off guard. He remained silent for a considerable moment, his gaze drifting to a corner of the room. He then stated that the experiment had reached its logical conclusion. He explained that by early December, both women had deteriorated to such a degree that he believed their survival was improbable. Their bodily functions were shutting down, their responses to stimuli were minimal, and he had gathered all the necessary data. He admitted to considering ending their lives to conclude the study, but ultimately decided against it. When asked why, he stated he was not interested in death itself, but rather the process leading up to it. Once that process was complete, the subjects lost their value to him. Consequently, he secured them to the tree, ensured their inability to escape, and departed. He had assumed they would perish within a day or two, and their bodies would eventually be discovered, by which time he would be long gone. He admitted he had not anticipated their discovery while still alive, and this outcome had surprised him. Finch asked Lell if he experienced any emotion upon learning the sisters had survived. Lell shook his head, stating he felt perhaps a degree of curiosity about how their bodies had managed to persist beyond his expectations, but nothing more. No relief, no guilt, no satisfaction, merely mild curiosity. The interrogation continued for several more hours, during which Lell provided specifics regarding the locations where he had held the sisters, the methods he employed to evade detection, and the chronological sequence of events over the 3-month period. He responded to every question calmly and thoroughly, treating the session as an academic discussion rather than a criminal inquiry. He exhibited no remorse, no acknowledgement of the pain he had inflicted, and no concern for the repercussions he would face. By the conclusion of the session, it was evident to everyone present that Vincent Lell would offer no apology or explanation that would resonate with a rational person. He inhabited a mental state where human life held no intrinsic value, where suffering was merely a data point, and where his actions were rationalized by his own warped pursuit of intellectual curiosity. The case against Vincent Lell proceeded rapidly. The evidence was overwhelming, and his own confession left no room for doubt. He was formally indicted on 2 counts of aggravated kidnapping, 2 counts of assault in the first degree, and 2 counts of attempted murder. Additional charges were levied pertaining to the use of restraints, the infliction of psychological trauma, and violations of federal statutes governing crimes committed on public lands. The trial commenced in the spring of 2022 in the United States District Court for the Western District of Washington. The proceedings garnered significant attention from both local and national media outlets, and the courtroom was consistently filled with reporters, legal observers, and members of the public eager to witness justice prevail. Nina and Rebecca Harlo both provided testimony, recounting in painful detail the 3 months they endured in captivity. Their accounts were emotionally charged and compelling, at times necessitating pauses in the proceedings by the judge to allow them to regain their composure. They described the physical agony of being bound for extended periods, the mental torment of uncertainty regarding their potential rescue, and the gradual realization that they were facing a solitary demise in the wilderness. However, they also spoke of the profound strength they derived from each other, their whispered words of encouragement, and their shared resolve to persevere each day. The prosecution presented the photographs from Leo's camera, the entries from his notebooks, and the forensic evidence collected from the crime scene and his campsite. Expert witnesses testified regarding the severity of the injuries the sisters sustained, the medical improbability of their survival, and the psychological ramifications of prolonged captivity and torture. The defense, which Lell eventually agreed to accept after being advised by the court, attempted to argue that he suffered from a mental disorder that compromised his capacity to comprehend the wrongfulness of his actions. A psychiatrist testified that Lell exhibited traits consistent with severe antisocial personality disorder and potential schizoid tendencies. However, the prosecution countered with their own expert, who stated that while Lell undoubtedly possessed profound psychological abnormalities, he was fully cognizant of his actions and had deliberately taken steps to evade capture, thereby demonstrating a clear understanding that his conduct was criminal. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. On April 14, 2022, they returned a verdict of guilty on all charges. The courtroom was filled with hushed sobs and sighs of relief upon the reading of the verdict. Nina and Rebecca, seated in the front row with their mother, embraced tightly, tears streaming down their faces. Sentencing occurred 2 weeks later. The judge, the Honorable Thomas Langford, a seasoned federal jurist, delivered a statement prior to announcing the sentence. He remarked that in his 30 years on the bench, he had never encountered a case that so starkly illuminated the depths of human cruelty. He noted that Vincent Lell had treated 2 human beings as if they were laboratory animals, subjecting them to unimaginable suffering for no reason other than his own insatiable curiosity. He declared that the only appropriate response was to assure that Lell would never again have the opportunity to inflict harm upon another person. Vincent Lell was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole on each count, to be served consecutively. In total, he received 6 life sentences. He displayed no discernible reaction as the sentence was pronounced. He simply nodded once, as if acknowledging a factual statement, and was escorted from the courtroom by federal marshals. In the months following the trial, Nina and Rebecca Harlo embarked on the arduous process of recovery. Both underwent extensive physical therapy to regain strength and mobility in their limbs, which had been severely compromised by prolonged restraint. They also participated in trauma counseling, working with specialists to process the psychological wounds inflicted by their ordeal. Their mother, Patricia, became a staunch advocate for missing persons and wilderness safety, collaborating with National Park Services to enhance communication systems and search protocols. She also established a foundation in her daughters' names to provide support for survivors of abduction and violent crime. Nina eventually returned to her profession as a graphic designer, though she admitted in interviews that she no longer felt comfortable in isolated environments. Rebecca took a leave of absence from her teaching position, but eventually returned to the classroom, stating that her students provided her with a purpose to focus on the future rather than dwelling on the past. Both sisters spoke publicly about their experiences, not to rehash the trauma, but to impress upon others the importance of vigilance, the remarkable resilience of the human spirit, and the necessity for communities to support survivors. The case of Nina and Rebecca Harlo became a significant reference point for law enforcement agencies nationwide. It is studied in training programs as a stark example of how quickly a routine outing can devolve into a nightmare, and the critical importance of maintaining search efforts, even when hope appears to have vanished. The survival of the two sisters after 3 months, defying all expectations, was credited to a confluence of indomitable spirit, a fortuitous finding by a biologist studying local fauna, and the thorough subsequent investigation. Vincent Lell is currently confined in a federal penitentiary, a maximum security establishment where his days are passed in solitude. He has offered no apologies for his deeds, and prison documentation indicates that he dedicates much of his time to perusing academic publications on science and composing entries in journals that are routinely seized and examined by correctional authorities. He has made no overtures to the Harlo family, and they have unequivocally stated their lack of desire to receive any communication from him. The woodland where the sisters were kept has reverted to its serene, unfeeling character. The ancient tree beneath which they were discovered persists, in mute testament to their ordeal and their resilience. Pedestrians occasionally traverse the area, oblivious to the dreadful events that transpired there. However, for those acquainted with the narrative, it stands as a memento that even within the most picturesque surroundings, malevolence can lurk, and that the fortitude to persevere can emerge from the most unexpected situations. Nina and Rebecca Harlo endured because they were resolute in their refusal to surrender, because they clung to one another, and because, somewhere within the desolate, unforgiving expanse of nature, a sliver of optimism persisted.